Okay, so we're going to go ahead and work numbers 10 through 19 on the review. Number 10 is another application problem like number 9, where the path of the ball for a golf ball is described by the equation h equals 70t minus 5t squared, where h is the height and t is the time. Letter A says, how high is the ball after 3 seconds? So for this one, t is equal to 3. Therefore, we can just replace the t with a 3. Every time we see a t, we're going to put a 3. Then we can use our calculator, and we can just type it in, 70 multiplied by 3 minus 5 times 3 squared, 165. If you don't have your calculator, of course, you can just use the order of operations. This is 165 meters. Letter B says, after how many seconds will the ball be 169 meters high? Well, that's talking about your height. So h equals 169. So as we put that into our h in the calculator, into the equation, this is what we would come up with. Now, for solving this, remember you have to have an equal 0, and generally we like to get the t squared to be positive. So I'm going to move the 70t to the other side. I'm also going to move the 5t squared to the other side. And remember, when we change sides, all we're doing is changing signs. So this would be 5t squared minus 70t plus 169, and that's equal to 0. Once we're here, we can do one of 3 things. Remember, you have 3 methods for solving. You've got graphing, quadratic formula, and factoring. Now, I would not probably choose the factoring because these have such large numbers and that there's not a greatest common factor here. And if you were looking in the calculator, you may not be able to find the answers again since there are such large numbers. And so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and use the quadratic formula. Remember, the quadratic formula is like your last resort, but it will always get you some type of an answer. And so when we do our quadratic formula, remember, we have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, recently I've told my students to, as they are looking at this formula, to go ahead and put parentheses around the letters. Okay, just leave this formula here, put the parentheses around the letters, and then just take a moment and erase the letters that are there. In doing this, you have your entire formula the way that it's supposed to be. You have your parentheses, so you're not going to make mistakes there. You also have the remnants of what letter goes in what places here. So what you have to do is figure out what the letters are. Remember, it goes ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That means that a would be 5, b negative 70, and c 169. So the b in this case would be a negative 70. And we're going to put a negative 70 here also. This would be negative 70. This is negative 70. This is a 5, and then this is 169. On the bottom, it's an a, so that would be a 5. So now that we've got it, the numbers plugged into the appropriate letters, we just have to simplify. Negative times negative 70 is 70, plus or minus. And then again, inside the calculator, we can type this in. We have negative 70 squared minus 4 times 5 times 169. Now remember, when we're doing this, we do not type in the square root symbol yet. So that's 1,520. And then, of course, 2 times 5 is 10. Our next step is to take that square root of 1,520 and figure out what that is. So our calculator can help us there again. So second square root is with the x squared, 1,520. And we're wanting to round to the nearest tenth. But if you look at how to round to the nearest tenth, it ends up rounding the entire number to a 39. So this would be, and I'll write it here, 70 plus or minus 39 divided by 10. Now we're going to break this up into two separate problems. 70 plus 39 divided by 10 and 70 minus 39 divided by 10. When you add 70 and 39, you get 109 divided by 10 is 10.9. And then 70 minus 39 divided by 10 is 3.1. So our 2 times, when it's going to be 169 meters high, would be 3.1 seconds and 10.9 seconds. Let's look at letter C. Letter C says, when will the ball hit the ground? It will hit the ground, that is h equals 0. And so we're going to put the 0 in that formula where the h is. And again, we want to get that t squared positive, so I'm just going to move both of those to the other side. And I'm going to put them in order, so we have 5t squared minus 70t. Now, just as a reminder, you don't actually have to move these around unless you have 3 terms and you want the t squared to be positive. Because if you were to go ahead and factor this, you could factor it and solve it with no problems because there are just 2 terms. Okay? Rooftop doesn't generally work well with a negative x squared. As we're looking here, the probably the easiest method would be, besides graphing, would be using the factoring method. They both have a 5t, so that's your greatest common factor. And this would be t minus 14 is equal to 0. So we're going to set each one of these factors equal to 0. 5t equals 0 and t minus 14 equals 0. Divide by 5, t is 0. Add 14, t is 14. Now when it says it's going to hit the ground, that means it's going to hit the ground again at 14 seconds. Now if we were to look in the calculator, we could type that equation into the calculator, 5x squared minus 70x. If we were to hit graph, we would try to look to where it's crossing the x-axis. And I really only see one place where it's crossing. I see the 0, but I don't see the other one. Someone in one of my earlier classes said, well, why can't you just go look at the table? Well, you can. If you can't see it on the graph, we could look at the table, and remember these are x-intercepts. What we're trying to find are where it's crossing the x-axis. And an x-intercept has a y that's a 0, so you'll see that the number 14 is where it's going to cross the x-axis again. And so 14 seconds would be your answer for that one. Number 11. This is another applications problem with a quadratic. You'll notice we have a squared there, so that means we're going to end up having to factor, but we have to get it equal to 0 first. So we're going to subtract 18 on both sides. W squared minus 7w minus 18 is equal to 0. On this one, you could do any method. You could graph, you could do factoring, you could do quadratic formula. I'm going to go ahead and graph this one. So we've got y equals x squared minus 7x minus 18, and I'm going to hit graph. I can see that it's crossing at the negative 2 here, and I can also see that it's crossing here at the 9. And you can't see the entire graph, but you can at least see where they're crossing. And so w is equal to negative 2 and w is equal to 9. The problem with this is not the answer. Because we're doing a real life situation, we're looking for a width. Can you have a width that is a negative? You cannot have a negative length. If you were trying to find the width of this paper, you could not say that this is a negative 2 inches. Okay, so that one is not a possible answer. It's not reasonable. So the only answer that you would have here is w equals 9 units. Number 12. Which of the following is not an accurate description of y equals x plus 3 times x minus 8? Since you have a y equals, you can put this into the calculator. So we're going to type that in directly like we see it. And remember, you have access to the graphing calculator on Blackboard. So here's the equation. And what we want to do is see what answer choices will not work. So it says letter A, the parabola opens upward. If you press the graph, you see that it's fatter at the top than it is at the bottom. So that means, yes, it does go upward, which means that this is a true statement. This is not one of the answers because we're looking for which one does not work. The next one says the solutions are -3 and 8. Let's look at the x-axis. 1, 2, -3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That does work, so this is also true. So that one's not an answer. The next one is talking about the vertex. The vertex, remember, is the highest or lowest point on the parabola. And so we're looking for the vertex to be a 2, -15, but I can't see it on the graph. So the next best place to look would be the table. And so I'm looking for the 2. If 2, -15 was there, we would have to make sure that it was the lowest point in our graph, and it's not. It's not even there. 2, -15 is not there, so this one is not the answer. But let's just double check and make sure that the letter D is not there, or that it is there. We're going to look for 0, -24, and if you look right here, 0, -24 is present in our table, which means that this is also true. And that means that C is my final answer. This one does not have a vertex of 2, -15. Number 13 is looking for the area of the rectangle. Remember, the rectangle has an area that is length times width. And it tells us that 3x plus 2 is the length and 3x minus 4 is the width. And we're supposed to be multiplying these, but just putting a dot or an X or a multiply sign is not going to work here. Because we have a binomial multiplied by a binomial, we want parentheses. Because in doing so, this indicates that we have to be fair. We have to say 3x times 3x is 9x squared. 3x times -4 is -12x. 2x times 3x is 6x. And 2 times 3x is 6x, and 2 times -4 is a -8. When you get here, then you want to keep putting things together. We want to get it simplified. So we've got -12x plus 6x, and that's -6x. Then you just drop the other ones down, and that would be your area. Okay? Let's move on to number 14. This is a review question. In order to get the x by itself, we have to simplify this first. So we're going to distribute. This would be 7x plus 28. Distribute here, -2x minus 6. Distribute again, 6x plus 30. On this side, there are things that we can put together. We can put together the 7x and the -2x and make it 5x. We can put together the 28 and the 6 and make it 22. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to take this 6x and we're going to move it to the other side by making it a negative. This would be -1x, and just copy the rest of it down. Now we want the numbers to move to this side, so we're going to subtract 22. So we have -1x equals 8. And if we divide by -1, then x is equal to -8. Number 15. The volume of the rectangular prism is 84 x to the 7th y to the 4th z squared. So let's talk about the volume of a rectangular prism. You know the volume to be the length times the width times the height. And it tells you that the volume is 84 x to the 7th y to the 4th z squared. Then it says the length is 4x squared y. So we're going to put 4x squared y here. And the width is 7xy, z. And we want to find the height. Well, the first thing that we need to do to find the height is to go ahead and simplify what we have on the right-hand side here, okay? So 4 times 7 is 28. And remember, when you're multiplying bases, you are adding their exponents. So this would be x to the 3rd, since this is a 1. The y's would be y squared, since each one of these has a 1 for an exponent. And then we're just going to have a z there. And you're just going to write the other things down since we haven't used them. All right, you could do one of two things for the rest of this. You could see that this is being multiplied and you're missing one, so you could divide. Or you could just talk it through. 28 times what will give you 84. And so as you're thinking about that, you should see that that would be a 3. Then x to the third times what will give you x to the seventh? Well, that would be x to the fourth. And y squared times what would give you y to the fourth? That's y squared. And z times what will give you z squared? And that would just be plain z. So this is what's missing for the height. All right, looking at number 16, it says, what are the factors? When it says squared right here and it's asking for the factors, that means that you have to do your factor flow chart, which means the first thing you do is look for a greatest common factor. There is no greatest common factor, so now you count the terms. 1, 2, 3 terms. So this would be rooftop. So we do 2x squared times 2, and that's going to be 4x squared. And we want to add to the middle term, which is 5x. So 1x times 4x gives you 5x, and so these are the numbers that are going to replace the 5x here in our polynomial. This would be 2x squared plus 1x plus 4x plus 2. Then we group them, 2x squared plus 1x in one group, and 4x plus 2 in the other group. All right, so now we find the greatest common factor, which in this case is an x, and we're left with 2x plus 1. X times 2x is 2x squared. X times 1 is 1x. In the next one, we've got a 2 that's the greatest common factor, with the 2x plus 1 left over. And so since we've got 2x plus 1 that's the same, that would be one of our factors. And then our greatest common factors get to be the other factor. So this x plus 2 comes from our greatest common factors. Now we are finished with this one. This is our final answer. And the reason it's our final answer is because it does not have an equal 0 and it does not say solve it. Okay? It's just asking for what two things multiplied together to give you that product. All right, number 17. The first 5 terms of a number sequence are the following. It says, which of the following expressions, which one of these, represents the general term of the sequence? Now remember, and I did give you a hint on this one to make a table of values. And it says the number in the sequence is the x. Well, if you're looking at this sequence, remember a sequence is something that's ordered, okay? And so the first number that you see there is number 1. The second number would be 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if I wrote it in a table, then the first number would be 6, 2 would be 10, 3 would be 14, 4 would be 18, and 5 would be 22. And so this is the letter for N, and then this is the term. Okay, so each one of these is called a term. All right, so now what we're doing is we're trying to find, in general, what's the pattern for these numbers to come into existence. Well, so if you're looking at a table of values, there are several things that you could do here. You could plug in the x values, or n values in this case. You could take each one of these answers, each one of these n's, and plug it in for the n here. So, for example, if I was to do the letter A, you would say 6 times 1 gives you 6, and that works, but does 6 times 2 give you 10? No, it doesn't. That doesn't work. So let's try another method. Remember, you could also try stat edit and then do stat calculate. Number 4, and then press enter. So if I was to do that, stat edit, I would write those numbers in our calculator. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then 6, 10, 14, 18, and 22. So that was going to stat and edit. Then to get the equation, I could go to stat and calculate, number 4, and then press enter, and it would give me the equation that I was looking for, which in this case is 4x plus 2. Okay, so that stat edit goes immediately to the answer, where on the number 1 strategy, you would have to plug those numbers in. Another strategy would be to find your slope, which is the change in y over change in x. And then you could do the y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So your change in y is 4, and your change in x is 1. So this would be 4 over 1, which is 4 for your slope. And then you could just choose a point, like 314. That would be y minus 14 equals the slope, which is 4, times x minus 3. Now to solve this, remember you can first distribute. So this is y minus 14 equals 4x minus 12. And if we add 14 to both sides, then we get y equals 4x plus 2, which is the same answer we got when we did stat edit. And it would have been the same answer had we finished plugging in the x values. Number 18 is very similar to the step number 3, the strategy number 3 that we found here. It gives us, except it already tells you what the slope is. Okay, so all we have to do is this formula y minus y1 and plug in the appropriate numbers, and it'll give us our equation right away. So we have y minus the y number, which is negative 2. The slope is negative 1, and x minus the x number. So then these change to plus a positive, and we distribute. So this is y plus 2 equals negative 1x plus 3. If you subtract 2 on both sides, then you end up with y equals negative 1x plus 1 for that one. And the last one, number 19. The first thing we need to do is remember what a system of equations is. A system of equations is two equations which create two lines. Those two lines generally cross, and where they cross is the solution. So there are two equations, the two lines that cross, and where they cross is the solution. And if we just were to sketch two lines here, this right here, where they're crossing, that is the same point. They share the same point. Now, in these two tables, if you look at it closely enough, you should see that they share the same point. 3, negative 3. So you should have been able to get that answer right away. If it does not share the same point, then yes, there are other strategies that you have to do. We could use the same strategies that we had up here, which would be stat edit, to get this equation. We would get y equals 2x minus 9, and this one would be y equals negative 3x plus 6. And once you have these two equations using one of the strategies that's up here, then you could take and put those into the calculator. You could go to y equals, and you could type in 2x minus 9, and you could also type in negative 3x plus 6, and you could see that they are two lines that are crossing right here, and they share that same point. And we could look on the calculator in the graph, but it might be better if we looked in the table, second and graph, and we just look to see where they're the exact same. And if you notice right here, they are exactly the same at 3, negative 3. And so you can see it in the calculator if the tables do not already have the solution listed. Be sure and watch the video as many times as necessary to make you very prepared for the test tomorrow, and good luck.